Hey, what's going on everyone? In this more casual review, we'll be taking a look at the premium Bandai exclusive, Real Grade RX-78-3 Gundam G-3. Yeah, believe it or not, I actually do have a few real grades sitting around. While I will always value anime accuracy and sturdy engineering, these little 1/144th hand grenades can still be a lot of fun to build. I hear some of those newer builds, like that real grade new Gundam, are just crazy. Of course, this Gundam G3 is based on the original real grade RX-78-2, which is almost a decade older than that new Gundam. So naturally, many newer builders are a little hesitant to pick this guy up. Hopefully, this review can fix that. Now as always, we'll be looking at this kit in 4 categories: the build, appearance, articulation, and the gimmicks. While this is technically a review of the Gundam G3 specifically, since this kit is almost a carbon copy of the original RX-78, you can basically consider this review a 2-in-1. I'll try to mention kit-specific differences when they pop up though. Alright, now let's jump right into this real grades build. Like I mentioned before, this really is just a color swap of the original RX-78, using all the same runners and engineering. That kit came out way back in 2010, so it was back when real grades really focused heavily on having a pre-built inner frame. Yeah, the bulk of this inner frame is actually already made for you, right on the runner. You just cut them out, then twist and turn certain pieces into place. Then you put armor over top of it. As much as I enjoy building inner frames, with this kit being so small, it's probably for the best that some of this was pre-built, as it really cuts down on those smaller pieces. The frame itself is super bare bones, with pretty much nothing to paint up here. However, that is totally offset by this fantastic engineering. There are tons of sliding hatches and plates on this kit that move whenever you pose this guy. I mean, just look at this leg. This is more intricate than a lot of master grades. And remember, this is a 1/144th kit, so getting all this in such a small package is pretty amazing on Bandai's part. It does, however, make this kit not super beginner friendly. While I totally think it's possible for this to be someone's first kit, I also highly recommend trying a high grade or something first, because it'd be a real shame to buy a kit like this just to make one mistake and have the whole kit ruined, you know? Anyway, moving on to this armor, there's no real bad nubs here thanks to the abundance of white and off-white pieces. And amazingly, everything here comes in the correct color. Even this V-fin on the waist, which is usually a sticker on 1/144th kits, is actually a separate piece here. Same goes for these head Vulcans. This is really just master grade level part separation in the palm of your hand. My only real complaint with this kit's build is that some of this panel lining can be pretty shallow. Specifically these lines on the legs. The channels here just aren't quite deep enough to hold on to ink, so you might have to carve them out a little bit, or just opt for paint instead. As far as the specifics for this RX-78-3, there's really nothing outside of the runner colors being swapped out. You do get 2 additional runners though, one for the metallic coating locks on the limbs, and a new yellow runner for the cross on the shield, V-fin on the waist, and the scope of this gun. But really, there's so little changed in terms of the build that Bandai doesn't even print a new manual, instead just giving you a little extra insert to explain the changes. Really, the main difference between these 2 kits is in this appearance. First off, the elephant in the room here. I am all about anime accuracy, and I prefer when these mechs look how they looked on screen, you know? But when it comes to real grades, that is all out the window. These kits are supposed to be over-designed, realistic takes on these anime robots, so just give me all the panel lines, decals, and modern proportions you can. Okay, starting out with those proportions, they're just as slimmed up as you'd expect from a real grade, having tons of sharp edges and swooping curves. These legs specifically really emphasize this, being super streamlined, but still having some very slight curves to them that make them look more modern. The arms are a bit on the blockier side, but still fit in very well with the rest of this design. I'm also a huge fan of this head, as it's the perfect blend of blockiness and modernization. This is probably my favorite head sculpt for the RX-78. On to the colors. One of the most interesting aspects of these earlier real grades is the use of different shades of white for the armor. There's a pure white, a darker gray, and a more tannish color. each getting their own molded pieces. This armor mixes between the three, creating a really nice subtle effect that spices up this design without overloading your eyes. The accent colors, though, are the real selling feature of this Gundam G3. You'll notice it essentially just removes the standard red, blue, and yellow in favor of a more monotone gray color palette. That could lead this kit to looking really boring, but instead we get this nice pale purple and a really bright bluish gray. Despite this supposedly being less colorful, each of these colors has the saturation just cranked up to 11. There's also the singular yellow V fin on the waist, just to add some variety. So really, even though this kit is supposedly less colorful, there's a lot going on here, and these colors really pop in comparison to the various shades of white. I actually think I like the colors of this G3 more than the original. The panel lines are also really solid here. Again, real grades are specifically made to be overloaded with panel lines, but honestly, this kit really isn't. There's quite a few on the legs, but generally speaking, it's just a few tick marks here and there. Really, the bulk of these panel lines come from legitimate seam lines between these three shades of white pieces. It's a really cool effect. You get a ton of peel and stick stickers with this kit, and being a real grade, I was essentially obligated to use as many of them as I could. In my opinion, they really help this kit look more realistic. All these stickers work pretty well too, with my only issue being these foil stickers used on the limbs. See, they have to fold around a few edges, and being on a joint, they'll pop up in seconds. I've seen people paint these, and that's probably the way to go here, as after a few poses, these stickers just look terrible. This Gundam G3 specifically comes with the exact same standard sheet as the original ARC-78, but you do get a few extra waterslide decals specifically made for this kit. I really like that you get two options for the shoulders, one that's in line with the original ARC-78 release, and this black version with these 3 dashes. Also, yeah, these G3 specific decals are waterslide, so try and top coat them if you can, or you'll wind up with them scratching off like I have here. I usually wait until after I review a kit to apply a top coat, as to not alter the appearance too much for the video. But here, I really wish I would have top coated beforehand. Having said that, I actually kind of like this worn out look. It has kind of a weathered feel to it. Anyway, once you get this guy into a cool pose, there's so much going on with this suit's design that you kind of don't notice these smaller mistakes. Speaking of cool poses though, let's move on to this articulation. Starting with these feet, there are 2 joints in here that actually allow for some solid footing. The ankles have 2 really good ball joints, which further help this kit get some great ground poses. I really like how when you tilt the foot forward, this ankle armor intentionally pries open a little bit. It's a really cool effect. The knee bend is really clicky, but it gives you a very solid 180-degree bend. These moving armor pieces on the thigh and knee are just amazing though, especially for a 1/144th kit. Try not to force any of these bends, by the way. This inner frame kind of needs to be broken in a little bit, so the first couple poses you do with this guy need to be taken very, very slowly. After a few poses though, he'll loosen up enough for some really dynamic stuff. Moving up to these hips, they're essentially a variation on the standard polycap on a peg setup. This means you get some really great kicks, some solid splits, and a decent spin below. The weirdest joint on this kit though is this moving mechanism inside the waist that sort of allows you to move the whole hip section forwards and backwards. It's a cool gimmick, but I honestly haven't found much use for it. Maybe it'd help with like a crouching pose or something. The skirts really don't get in the way as much as you'd expect. I mean, you definitely notice that they're there, but they have enough movement to get them up and out of the way of the legs. Onto this chest, you'll notice it does have a core block inside, so you're fairly limited here, mainly getting some sideways tilts, some okay spins, and a very, very slight tilt forwards. I have heard that if you transform the included core fighter and use that instead, he loses some of this chest articulation, but thanks to the dedicated core block, you never really have to deal with it. The shoulders feature the standard lateral movement, and the usual 360-degree spin thanks to its variation of a polycap on a peg. There is an amazing extra joint in here though, that allows the arm to point straight upwards. I bet Bandai had that final shooting pose in mind with this joint. Moving our way down the arm, you get the standard 360-degree spin on top and almost a 180-degree bend from this elbow. Again, there's some moving pieces in this bicep that just look amazing. The hands are the usual ball joints, but there is an extra joint in here that allows them to swing forward and backward slightly. You get 2 sets of hands with this kit. The first is a dedicated set of closed fist, which is my go-to, since the second set of hands is really finicky. See, they're sort of like that old school master grade trigger finger split, but because these hands are so small, instead of hinges, it uses a weird ball joint. This makes these fingers really difficult to get working, and they'll pop out all the time, especially this thumb. I'm sure you'll notice in quite a few poses here that I kinda just gave up and took the thumb out completely. Lastly, the head is on a deep ball joint, and the neck is on a hinge, so you get a great tilt backwards from the neck, allowing for my favorite Katoki pose. All in all, this is really solid stuff for a kit with this level of engineering. All these moving pieces are just beautiful. While I've heard these joints become really loose over time, I honestly haven't experienced that. Really, I mean, I'm the guy that basically broke the Master Grade Turn A, so I understand when joints can become loose, but honestly, I really haven't experienced that with this kit. For me at least, this kit has been able to hold just about every pose I throw at him, and he looks amazing in each one, especially when you factor in these gimmicks. First up is the iconic beam rifle. It's a really straightforward build, but there are some nice details in here that you could panel line up. This guy can also hold this gun pretty decently once you get it into his hand. But that's the thing, getting it into his hand to begin with is really rough. Since instead of just having the standard peg in the hands, each weapon has a fold-out peg that hooks into a slot inside the palm. It's super finicky, especially once you factor in how annoying these fingers can be. However, once you get the weapon in place, it'll stay put pretty well. Moving on to these beam sabers, you actually get 4 handles with this kit. 2 normal handles for storing in the backpack, and 2 that have a peg built in for actual posing. These blades are something else though. They're just super tall, being the size of this kit and then some. As such, every pose you do with this beam saber is going to look super exaggerated. It's just great. Next is the token RX-78 shield. I really like that they added panel lines in here. They really spice up this design, but they don't go too overboard with it. The added G-3 decal also looks really cool. This kit can hold this shield pretty well too, with it plugging into a slot on the arm. Because of this inner frame, there really aren't any serious weight issues with it either. Of course, I have heard some horror stories from other people, but again, I just haven't run into any weight issues. You can store both beam sabers and the beam rifle in here as well. Lastly, for the weapons, you get his hyper bazooka. I really like that it comes in white, as most 1/144th RX-78s just have it come in gray instead. He can hold this weapon about as well as the rifle too, and thanks to some solid articulation in the elbow and wrist, you can easily get it resting on the shoulder. You can also store the bazooka on the back of the skirt, inside this little opening here. However, the connection can be very weak. I really don't recommend removing it too often, as this is the one joint on my kit that really has loosened up over time. This is also where you attach a dedicated action-based connector. While in theory, this makes sense and gives the legs a larger range of motion compared to the usual connectors, but in practice, it makes this kit very unbalanced in the air. Of course, his leg articulation is so solid anyways, that I really didn't feel the need to get him in the air. If you do though, you may be forced to use one of those old school fork connectors, so heads up. Lastly, this kit comes with a fully transformable core fighter. It looks really solid, even coming with landing gear, so you can display this on its own. While you can transform it for use in the chest, I personally haven't tried it, as Bandai was courteous enough to include a dedicated core block. Just perfect. And that about does it for the gimmicks. It's all your standard additions, functioning pretty well. I'd say if you can deal with the fingers being a little finicky, then you'll have a wide selection of action poses available to you. Now it's time to wrap all this up here. All in all, I really enjoyed this kit. This is probably one of my favorite real grades, and it definitely stands out on my shelf. The build can be pretty technical, but it's overall really interesting, with its partially pre-built inner frame and great part separation. The appearance here is just flawless, specifically with this G3 version. It has tons of great details and surprisingly vibrant colors. The articulation lets you do pretty much any pose you can think of, and thanks to a solid set of weapons, you have tons of action poses to work with. This kit is really everything you could ask for from an RX-78. This G3 specific version may just be a simple color swap, with some extra decals here and there, but these minor changes go a long way. Honestly, I find this G3 variant gets way more attention on my shelf than the standard version. This G3 is totally worth picking up, at least if you can find one. Anyway, feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where I post updates and work in progress builds. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you next time.